Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking time in your busy schedules for coming to listen to this topic, which is near and dear to all of us on this panel. And what you will be hearing today, and I'm just going to introduce the speakers, and then they are going to really introduce themselves and their perspective on the title of this panel, which you can see, Censorship of Books, what is the state of children's book publishing around the world, and what is being done. Clearly, every country is not represented here, so, but you will get a sense of what we are all experiencing and thinking about. So I just want to introduce the speakers. They are then going to tell you a little bit more about themselves. And we are seated in the way I'm introducing you. John Anderson is president and publisher of Simon & Schuster's Children's Books in New York and on the board of the National Coalition Against Censorship. Doris Sotomayor is a member of the Instituto Emilia in Brazil and coordinator of the postgraduate course in children's books at the Catholic University of Lisbon, representing Portugal. Doris Brett-Moser is the managing director of the Association for Children's Literature. I don't want to. Okay, I didn't want to do it in Germany. And Georgia Grillier is professor of children's literature and co-founder of the Center for Research in Children's Literature in the Department of Education at the University of Bologna, right here in Italy. But I'm sure we'll add, as Elena had talked about Italy, we'll be telling us about that. And last but never least is David Levithan, who is a prominent author. He is a publisher, but we at Random House Children's are very proud to publish David. One of the books that we did name is Two Boys Kissing, and he will actually be talking about in both, I don't know what he'll be talking about, but he has many hats, so he will be discussing that. I'm just going to start with, there's a wonderful study that I would recommend if you want to go deeper into this. Am I not loud enough? Sorry if you can't hear me. Into the state of censorship in the United States that was put out by PEN America just recently. So I'm going to read a little bit from that just to set the stage. And the first thing is, what is a book ban? So PEN America defines a school book ban as any action taken against a book based on its content and as a result of a parent or community challenges administrative decisions or in response to direct or threatened action by lawmakers or other governmental officials that leads to a previously accessible book being either completely removed from availability to students or where access to a book is restricted or diminished. So just hearing those words are so frightening, but it is important to recognize that books available in schools, whether in a school or classroom library or as part of a curriculum, were selected by qualified librarians and educators as part of the educational offerings to students. And so I'm going to go, so in the United States, there are more books banned, more districts, more states, more students being denied access to literature. More is the operative word in the United States. And so some of the numbers, I'm just going to quote some numbers, and then I'm going to move to my fellow panelists. There were about 2,500 registered through PEN book bans, and they do feel that there were many, many more, but these are the ones that they know of. And this impacted almost 2,000 titles, making sure I'm reading, over almost 1,300 authors, 260 illustrators, and some smaller number of translators, impacting the schools, the books available in schools. And so then you get to the kind of books that have been banned. 41% explicitly address LGBTQ+ themes. 650 book bans, 40% protagonist or prominent secondary characters of color. 21% directly address issues of race and racism. And 22% contain sexual content of varying kinds. So you can see there is a range, but there also is a pattern. So PEN identified at least 50 groups involved in pushing for book bans across the country, operating at the national, state, or local levels. Of those 50 groups, 8 have local or regional chapters that between them number at least 300 in total. Just as in total. Some of these operate predominantly through social media. And I could go on and on. I sort of put big stars to stop talking because there's so much information about that. Most of the books are young adult books, which I think we know, but just to confirm that. And of the 2,532 bans, 96% were enacted without following the best practice guidelines for book challenges outlined by the American Library Association and the National Coalition Against Censorship. I will stop there and hand it over to John Anderson.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm John Anderson. I'm the president of the Children's Publishing Division at Simon & Schuster in New York. And in a nutshell, I can say that the censorship situation in the United States has never been worse. In fact, a book of ours that we published almost 25 years ago called And Tango Makes Three, which is a charming story about 2 male penguins in the Central Park Zoo raising a baby chick together, has been challenged just yet again in the past few weeks. And as is often the case when this happens, the sales have skyrocketed. So, you know, it's always a question of what is it the people who do this are hoping to accomplish. But in many ways, excuse me, it increases our sales. But I'm also on the board, as Barbara said, of an organization called the National Coalition Against Censorship. And I've been on that board for a little over a decade. And the change that I've seen over those last 10 years has just been dramatic. If you'd asked me the same question a decade ago, I would have told you that most of the censorship we were seeing in a lot of ways was actually coming from the left in sort of soft censorship in really sort of a well-meaning way in an attempt to right wrongs from decades and centuries ago. And that still goes on to some degree as far as decisions that are being made as to what books get published, decisions about who can write what, and even how to handle books from dead authors like we just so recently saw with Roald Dahl. But in just the past couple of years, it's the censorship from the right that has just erupted like a raging fever in a lot of ways, and in a way I've never seen in my lifetime. There was a spurt of censorship from the right back in the 1980s that seemed intense at the time. That sort of faded away, and for the next 30 years, there really wasn't a whole lot other than really sort of unorganized and sporadic attempts at censorship. But just in the last few years, things have really gone crazy in a lot of ways. Most of this is being stoked by right-wing politicians in the United States, and it's basically part of a cynical attempt on their part to stoke their base for political support. It's probably the worst in the state of Florida at the moment. We have a governor in that state, Ron DeSantis, who has plans to become president, quite obviously, and he's basically stoking this war in order to energize his base. But one of the things that we're seeing with the censorship challenges from the right currently are that they are organized in a way that they have never been before. In the past, it was really a lot of lone wolves trying individual attempts on specific books in very specific communities. Now they are basically organizing themselves nationally, and they are going after teachers, librarians, booksellers even, and they don't seem to be showing any signs of stopping at the moment. Excuse me for a second. There's an organization called Moms for Liberty that basically puts out information to all of their members about which books they should be upset about. It gives them strategies for challenging those books and getting them pulled from schools. And it's the organization I'm on, the National Coalition Against Censorship, is sort of facing almost a forest fire of these challenges in a way that we've never focused before. It's very frightening in a lot of ways, and it is requiring us to develop new strategies to fight them that we've never had to do before. The National Coalition has always been incredibly effective at marshaling students themselves in how to basically fight back for their rights, and and that's actually always been one of our greatest strengths, because to fight organized censorship, you really have to organize the people who are being affected by that censorship, and that is what the NCAC is really trying to do in a major way now. On the positive side, there is some positive aspect of all this. There is, the students are being energized and organized, and they are fighting back for their rights. And as we all know, there's nothing like trying to tell a teenager something they can't do to make them want to do it. It's effective as far as sales of books. I can't complain about that. But it really is energizing young people in a way that's really encouraging and fascinating to see. And also on the positive side, the more aggressive the right has been getting about trying to pull books from schools and pull books from libraries and threatening teachers and threatening librarians, even with prison time, if they let children see books that some people think they shouldn't see. It is sort of beginning to blow up in their faces in a way. They are increasingly losing more and more elections as a result of the stands that they're taking. But at the moment, things really are about as bad as I've ever seen them.
On that Really, I mean, we're being, oops, okay, I'll do this. You know, we are being conversational here. I think our hearts are breaking that we know that children may not be able to have an opportunity to read some of the books that we all think would be so helpful and important to them, and that is such a sad state of affairs. I'm going to move down the panel to Dora Sotomayor. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm short for microphones. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, everybody, for being here this morning, my colleagues. I'm sorry for my English, which is not very good when spoken and worse when reading. I hope you can bear with me. And I had to write it not to lose my track. And I hope to give you a lighter vision than John about what's going on in Portugal. To begin with, following Nodelman's professor in Canada, very important in the realm of children's literature, he states, and has been stating that for a long time, sometimes reviewing what he says, that we are all censors. There are several articles that I recommend you to read. One of them was just translated by Emilia Institute in Brazil into Portuguese, which is very important. 2 articles. Former one, more older, and another one that he agreeing to publish it that in Portuguese from Brazil. He said, "Oh, I want to revise it and add another article." So we are all censored by Nodelman, and it's very enlightful. I'm sorry. So we are all censors in some way. We don't have all perspective. And to start with, the idea is to contrapose censorship with criticism. The idea of a criticism that is more plural, that gives you the reasons why you are saying what you say, and makes a discourse that would be unilateral, with plural. So that should be the main idea throughout what I'm going to say. And what I'm going to say, it's the voice of people that in Portugal work with books. I work with books in several ways. I teach. I try sometimes to experiment those books with children, just to make sure that what I'm teaching to my university students is correct and alive. I translate books. With some people, I organize collections. And I try always to be looking at the book at very different perspectives. The post-graduation course at Catholic University, we have people that were there here, and I'm very glad for that, had 1 year, school year, 160 hours, and we invited people that worked from different perspectives of the book. We had illustrators, several. We had designers, several. We had writing people and people that study criticism. We had psychology. We had, so this idea of we are all censors and we have just one perspective, or not all perspectives, we should get together and talk and exchange. So, like this, I went to people that work with the book in Portugal, like publishers, like illustrators, writers, book librarians and I ask them. I go to Bologna and I have to tell what's going on in Portugal. What do you feel? Because what I feel is just one line. I want to hear you. And that's what I'm bringing you here and like this. So, one of the persons I interviewed said to me, in Portugal, people choose freely and authors and publishers create freely. That's good news. But there's questions, and those questions arise and derive from constraints, restrictions that are more or less implicit, more or less conscious. Constraints that we don't know about sometimes, some others we know, and I'm explaining them. So, illustrators, my first panel. Portuguese illustrators in general do not reveal to have constraints that are very flagrant and that can be called censorship in a direct way. We are, in Portugal, still, and I hope we keep, fortunately, far from that in Portugal. In terms of their personal work or their own projects, that's what they say. When they want to create just for themselves or in their own publishing houses, they feel free. Still, the issues raised relate to the lack of awareness of the role of the illustration as a language in itself and the attempts to subordinate it to the verbal text. Which means 20 years ago in Portugal, many books for children didn't have the name of the illustrator on their cover. And the illustrator payment was much less than the writer. And still, in public and official entities in Portugal, when they want to name people that to do books, they say author, the writer, and illustrator, illustrator. And I try to say, no, they are both authors. One is the writer, and the other one is the illustrator. So this idea that the illustration is still a lesser text is not a language. It's just something to make it beautiful or more understandable. In some contexts, still exists. That's why independent publishing houses have modified that, and you know some of them are here very well represented. This is a censorship because it limits. I had two examples, and one of the books, one illustrator didn't go through because the writer said, please do not put anything else, then it's not in the text. Please do not illustrate anything else. And another one, the book didn't go through because it was Catarina Sobral, a very awarded illustrator. The writer said, no, this is another thing. This is not an apple. This is a bird looking at the apple. I don't want a bird. I just want the apple. This is the apple and the bird is just something I made up now. Another problem with illustrators, and it's the same, is about textbooks. Many recognized illustrators in Portugal now illustrate textbooks from school to school, but the same problem is literalization. And this is a very reductive place because banning inference and intelligence reading between the lines that the students could do with these illustrations in their textbooks is really impoverishment and a missed opportunity. Some kids just have the textbooks as their books, and with wonderful illustrators, they could really have access to texts like this. USA, I'm sorry, it was mentioned when some of the illustrators, when illustrating for United States, they have like 4 pages of things they can't do. One of them is that would not pass because it's a bikini. It should be a full bathing suit. That's what they said. So now I pass to publishers, writers, and translator. And I quote one of them. Here in Portugal, we had a case involved partners, so Portuguese people with Portuguese people. And these partners were very cautious with inclusive language. The conversations weren't all bad, and some of the questions raised were reasonable, others not so much. It seemed to me that the comments and suggestions for changing the texts resulted from an excessive sensitivity, lacking the ability to interpret irony and seeing differences everywhere. So this was in Portugal. Now, the huge issue of inclusive language is really the thing we feel most as censorship. It just dropped in Portugal. 2 years ago, we would not think about that, and now it's really strong. That's what the thing I felt that's most felt as something very coming from the outside and invading Portugal. We have difficulties. Portuguese language is not like the English one. Very many articles, feminine, masculine, and it's really, and it's a long sentences. It's really, really difficult now not to be ridiculous and say hello, boys, girls, and it's difficult to put it in books. And these demands. So that's my thing. This literature. Sorry, but this is not easy in the field that excludes more if you put this excessive marking of the inclusive language when it should not be so needed, excludes more than with so many tags. The reader and his capacity for otherness is excluded. Literature and books do not serve only as a mirror of oneself, nor demands that everyone is represented at the same time. This kind of language is full of marks and no longer allows for fictional immersion. So you are so into the marks of the grammar and language that you cannot really go into text. Cultural fit situation were also noted, like Arabic countries that demanded some changings in the illustrations, and that those were seen like good changes. And the publisher said to me, "Oh, I'm so pleased that this book is published in Arab countries. So I feel okay, not as a censorship that I have to change something. It's for cultural reasons." So another thing, speaking about foreign countries, I interviewed André Letria, and he reminded me of 2 episodes that I want to share with you. This is André Letria. He's down there somewhere at Pathological Pavilion. And I have a specialist here in this book he told me about. A little over 3 years ago, the book, The War, I don't know if you know, guerra means the war, was withdrawn from a group of potential Chinese prize-winning books. The jury for this award, gathered in China, was composed of Chinese and international judges. The Chinese judges met separately, and before the meeting of the international group that would choose the winners, they made the book disappear. The foreign editors, noticing the absence, protested, but the thing took its course. And it is a case that happened in China. It is not surprising, but it's still very important to remember. Second case with the same book. The other case, also not surprising, and is more recent. In the week before Russia's invasion of Ukraine began, the Russian publisher Samokat, who boldly bought the rights to the same book, sent into production, with the beginning of the conflict and the increase of internal dispute, the Russian government prohibited the book from leaving the press. Despite this, it seemed that the use of the word war became prohibited, and therefore the book could not be circulated. Despite this, the book circulated and was seen by other Russians, some of whom were exiles, and became in a way an instrument of opposition to the regime of censorship. Andrea said, I feel much more aware than ever the need of freedom of expression, and that includes inclusive language, without this threatening my ability to understand others. So, booksellers. There is no declared censorship, implicit, yes. A kind of self-censorship, and the money is one of them. Financial means that the book is going to sell or not. This is the very first restriction. The editor wants to sell and tries to bet on guaranteed things. For example, themes like LGBT are already taken for granted in Portugal, no problem. An important source for legitimation is the school. When a book is popular in schools, families buy it. For example, these bestsellers and classics, So Much and Under Surprise, only started to be bought in Portuguese bookstores after the school adopted them. Today, it would not be an issue, but 10 years ago, the racial fact was an obstacle, not a taboo, but a theme of no interest, because of the lack of relatability. It was not a problem that were black people and black cultures, but it's like we felt not represented, which is really something poor to say. A new type of censorship is the editor. The book seller told me. Later on. But like gypsies, we don't make books of gypsies because gypsies don't buy books, and this is limitation. Another type of censorship is the editorial offer that is so much that is difficult to sell and to create books that are not being done yet. So you should just release a book when it's needed in the world, not waste of paper. So this is another problem. Another, and was about young fiction, is the loss of the sense of otherness, which is particularly evident in young fiction. Young people are reading about themselves and their particular circumstances. Young people's books are increasingly divided into identities and their specific problems, and are deprived of adults that meant somehow a future to walk towards. To choose a book as one chooses a medicine in a sense of matching the circumstances is a huge impoverishment. Books, fiction, and art serve as an exercising of get out of ourselves and being others. We understand the other because we experience otherness. The circumstance is also changing edition and sales. The thing about the gypsies. So now if I'm homosexual and a boy and short and have pimples, I choose books of boys, short, homosexual, with pimples. Just like a kind of auto-contemplation. And this separation, so many tags, limits more than includes. So, teachers. This is a wonderful book. I want you to see down there in Pathological. It's wordless and won the National Prize for Illustration. I was in the jury, so I'm suspect, but the honor goes to the Ana Ventura. Please see it. It's wonderful, and it relates to everybody. Mudar means change. It's wonderful and fits well this topic we are talking about today. I'll not be very quick now. Teachers? No. So it means sometime, I don't know if this image, which is an herbo, not a Portuguese one, I was looking and contemplating this image for a long time. And I thought, do I include it or not? Because I don't know if people are relating to themselves or if they are shouting tags and different tags. I don't know. I left it here. I don't know if they are all communicating or if they are together but all separated. Just for you to think. Teachers, more than ever, they are concerned with feelings and choosing many self-help books for children with poor aesthetic qualities, especially in terms of scripts. And these kind of books instrumentalize in a shallow way, like naming emotions through linear and very predictable storylines. These monster of emotions and colors and things. Like if we don't feel ourselves and we are not able to feel others, so we need books to say, this is joy, and it's too shallow. And fear of witches and bad wolves, like they take traditional stories literally. This ban of Sleeping Beauty and the consent of kissing. She's not a woman, she's a symbol. It's deeper, the level where it operates. They do not know this symbolic importance in structuring the child's affectivity of growth. They belong to the generation that has never heard stories told live and whose babysitter was the TV. Parents, and the parent's choice is still very much traditional and is conditioned by implicit things which they are not aware. They inherit from their education things like books are for children to know how to read. I'm going to bookstores often to hear conversations of parents with kids and to know. And some of them, the other day was one kid that was 4-years old and he wanted a book that had writing more than pictures. And the mommy said, no, you cannot read. You just need a book with pictures. And the other way, reverse. They think when a child can read, it doesn't need to see images anymore. So it's very traditional concepts and very impoverished ones.
I just want to make sure we have enough.
Yes, sorry. Of course, publishing market, we speak Portuguese. We don't have African or Brazilian ones. In Portugal, it's very impoverishing. And Emilia, it's a group in Brazil. They do several things, they cross several lines, and now we are in Portugal trying to work together, this amplified discussing situation. And we have the lack of evaluation boards in Portugal. We just have one journalist in one national newspaper doing critique for children. We don't have many places. We're trying to work on it now. And so that's it. I think more than anything, I just want you to say, give it time, trust, sensitivity to creators of children's books. They are persons, they feel, they don't need to be so commended all time. So I think children's literature is like a blot paper. Whatever happens in society, soon it will come to the child's books. So give it time, and we will see how it. Be courageous. Don't take courage from children, and breathe. Make children think differently, because you give lots of different types of books and not everything so organized. I'm sorry for the time. That's it.
Thank you. So, thank you. I think some of the things I wrote down, which make it, about cultural differences, about we are all censors, the chilling story about the book in Russia, really a story for us all to think about, and many other things you raised, which I hope we will have a chance to discuss as a group. But moving on, Doris, do you want to take the stage?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to Bologna Book Fair for inviting me. So we are supposed to talk about censorship, but as Dora and I, we are both Europeans, maybe this is not even the right term. Okay, thank you. But before going ahead with that, just a few words on my behalf. My name is Doris Breitmoser. I'm the managing director of a German NGO, which is an umbrella organization focusing on children's literature and uniting all parties involved in producing and distributing and judging books. So that's maybe something I'm very close to Dora as well, because I'm not a publisher, and so I will offer other points of views, and sometimes maybe we will be very close to each other. So I'm also the co-editor of a quarterly literature magazine called Hewlett, and what is very important to me is that I'm currently a member of the board of the World Organization IBBY, and they are here in the book fair also with a stand. And some of the examples I will give refer also to colleagues. So I also made kind of a tiny field research. But that's not everything in my presentation. We might talk about something afterwards. So basically, in a democratic state, there is or should be no censorship, because we refer to the freedom of speech, the freedom of art, and thus the freedom of literature. And if you go around here in a book fair, we can see or we can observe that children's literature is very diverse, and we get the impression that there is no topic that might not be tackled by literature. So we could think everything is fine. Nevertheless, and I think this became already clear, especially children's literature is subject to very special framework conditions. And therefore, more than censorship, I thought we might speak in democratic countries, maybe of a discourse norming, which is not so much based to, I don't know, juridic patterns, but it's kind of something more subtle. And I choose, just as an impulse for our discussion afterwards, I choose 4 topics, because we have to remember that in addition to literary quality, the genre, the children's literature, must be measured against many other things. The prevailing image of childhood, for instance, educational ideas, and also the idea of what is appropriate for an age group in a certain culture. So I choose 4 topics. This is translation as a domain of hidden censorship, ? Literary awards, children's books, classics, refreshed, but, well, there will be an extra panel this afternoon on behalf of Roald Dahl, everybody is talking about right now. And also a short glance on social media and special interest groups. So, as for the translation, I'm sharing with you also for all topics, I will share my personal professional experience. And in this case, it's the experience with in international workshops with translators from all over the world, translating from German into their different languages. And all the translators I got to know in the last years seem to me to have that they want to be advocates for the text to be translated. This is very noble, but nevertheless, in the translation and publishing in other countries, there are many parties involved. And sometimes there are censorship authorities books have to go through, and also translations, which is, for instance, the case in Iran. And but there are also customs, norms, ideas of a child, or the idea that the child just won't get it, and we can't kind of overwhelm the child with information that is unknown to it. Very simply speaking, some people think a yellow postbox instead of a red one might be too challenging. Well, so this is a very interesting topic, and here in these pictures you can see the ideal status. This is the authors Isabel Abedi and Kirsten Boye, which are important authors in Germany, met their translators. But very often there is no control of what is happening in the translated book, especially if it is translated into languages which are not accessible to us. Well, awards. I'm very happy to be on this panel with one of our award winners, which is David Levithan. He won the German Children's Literature Award on behalf of the young adult jury. So, wow, it's great to be here together. And awards may also be afflicted by, well, norming or intrusion. But let's start with the bright side. So on the right-hand side, you can see our award ceremony, because my organization is also responsible for awarding this prize. With federal minister from the Green Party in the green dress in the center. So the ministry is funding this award and is very proud of it, but there's really, I can assure you, no interference with the jury's work. The jury is really independent. We have a rotation principle within the jury. So I would say this is really great, but it has not always been like that. And so on the left-hand side, you find one example of what happened in 1988. Well, the book is of German author Gudrun Pausewang, who wrote this novel on behalf of atomic. I wrote this word, super hazard. Yeah, that's it. So this story it's a young adult novel. There's also a little love story inside. You see, but at the end, it showcases how such a super hazard may destruct lives. And this wasn't according to official politics of the German government in these times. So there were huge interventions by politicians. They said, we can't award this book, we can't award this author. And I will make it short. I can tell you there was kind of a united initiative of the children's book world in the country, and at the end, the minister who had to award the book did it. It was a woman, a quite open-minded person for her time, I would say, and she agreed. The most important thing is to have an independent jury. And so there's good news. From that time on, the jury is really independent. Nevertheless, there might be phone calls in the office asking, how could you award this book with a governmental award, and so on. Yeah. Next, children's books classics. So you see, we won't talk so much about Roald Dahl, but I just wanted to showcase that Roald Dahl is not such a single event or case, and therefore I brought you two examples from Germany, which are real children's book classics in our country, from Michael Ende and Ottfried Preußler from around 1960. And, well, the problem in both books is kind of outdated language, maybe, or language changes. So on the left-hand side with Jim Knopf is the black child on the bottom, coming to an island and then getting adopted by the, can I say train driver? Yeah, okay. Which is also black because he's always handling with coal. So that's, well, sensitivity alarms will ring, but this author didn't have any racist intentions in his time, but nowadays you can read the book in another way. And as for Die kleine Hexe, which would be the little witch, this is also kind of a almost fairy tale setting of this witch in former times, going to a German village where children are dressing up like, okay, I will say the word, Indians or Eskimos, which is not admissible now, and there's also some children dressed up in, I will say, just N-word. So that's really a problem, and there was a huge debate in our country about how to tackle classics, and at the end there's not really a definite answer, because at the one hand the core question is a children book a work of art? If so, well, no interference with the text could be accepted. But, well, if it contains terms that might offend or disturb people, and the book is addressed to children who don't have the historical knowledge or to get clear how the term was used in former times, this might be problematic for teachers or for parents, for children themselves, and so on. There's the possibility to change single terms, but there is also the possibility to add a preface, an epilogue, or the famous footnotes we all hate, but sometimes it's an option. Because just changing terms in a literary work or in an artwork is just starting a huge mess, because it's not the word itself, but it's the complexity of the story. Well, and last but not least, we can see this with Roald Dahl, but it was also here with these two authors. There are also economic interests to which Dora already referred, that we also want to keep the book in the market. And maybe we also want to keep cultural heritage. So this is really difficult questions where there's not to be found an easy answer which can be generally applied. So my last insight or just impulse is social media and special interest groups, and we already heard about the US, and John already mentioned what happened, and I think this is very parallel to it. This is an incident, or this happened in the Netherlands in February this year, and my IB colleagues from the Netherlands shared this with me, but it was also in several newspapers out of the Netherlands as well. What happened? There is the National Children's Book Week in the country, and there's always an author supposed to or commissioned to write a poem for this event. And the one chosen was Pim Lammers, who is an awarded author in the country. He is awarded the Silver Griffin, which is also a national award. And the problem, I suppose, was that he is a queer author, and he had published before. He also published adult books, and with a content different to contents in children's books. So at the end, he had to face death threats in social media, and it was kind of a very, very huge debate. Pim Lammers withdrew. He didn't write the poem. He said it is not worthwhile writing a poem when you get death threats and your life is in danger. And he just closed all his social media channels. And, well, IBI Netherlands gave a statement, and I would just quote one sentence, which I found very interesting as well. The difference between author and character and the world of fiction for different audiences is apparently not clear to everyone. Yeah. So my conclusion would be, I have to look up if we have, So my conclusion is that there might be no official censorship, but there are, especially in children's literature, lots of gatekeepers, which might be editors as well, because you don't want to face problems and trouble, and you have to earn money and so on. This might be also translators. These might be reading promoters, of course, parents, families, and all the actors, so awards or people choosing and recommending books. The good news, I think, is that everyone believes that books and stories have such a great power that we really have to look very closely on that. And we had this debate in Germany, and we call it also cancel culture, cancel literature. And there's another positive outcome to me personally, because within the children's literature expert community, we started also to think about what is modern and nowadays children's literature about, what can it offer, how diverse might it be, but also what is the richness of this children's literature. So I hope that in our discussion we will also find something where, apart from all the sadness, on behalf of these examples, we might also kind of head forward and find something to be, well, you know, to work on and maybe even to get forward. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Doris. That was really compelling, and to talk about the 4 areas and how they have different nuances when you talk about censorship. So thank you. We move on to Georgia.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I am Giorgia Grilli. I teach children's literature and history of illustration for children at the university in Bologna. When I was thinking about what to say on the situation in Italy as far as book banning is concerned, I was struck by an article in the Washington Post reporting what Barbara just said before, that in the US every year, like more than 1,000 titles are banned from schools. And I mean, that's a huge number. It's a huge phenomenon, and one we should be worried about. And well, in Italy, the situation in Italy, we do not have, not even proportionately, of course, as many banned books, and we do not have many banned books in schools because we have a deeper problem. We don't have books in schools. I'm talking about novels, talking about fiction, talking about literature. The most important scholar of children's literature in Italy, Professor Antonio Faeti, who was the first professor of children's literature at the university level, once wrote an essay titled School and the Novel, A Dark Affair, in which he explains that basically the novel never made it into the classroom because historically, and especially in the 19th century, the novel was considered essentially subversive in itself. The novel makes us become critical of society as it is. The novel makes us become critical of what we are taught in formal education. Therefore, the novel should be left out of schools, and the situation has stayed the same since, basically. So, I mean, the real battle we have to fight in Italy as people who care about books, but even more about children and about democracy, is to finally make it become normal or structural for each and every school to have books that are not textbooks, and to have a librarian, which we don't have, and to have a library, a place where it is possible to find books, many books, quality books for children who might come from families that do not usually buy books. The presence of a school library in Italy is a total exception. And the presence of a good, well-stocked school library is a utopia. Where there is one, it usually contains books that were like left behind, so to say, by some generous teacher or parent, never selected by experts, not in the least up to date with what gets published or has recently been published. So obviously there is a worse situation than the one of having some or even many banned books in schools, and it is the situation where you don't have books, you don't offer any book, you don't consider books as an essential part of school life. We do have, of course, some virtuous situations, but they depend on the single motivated teacher or on someone outside the school system, like some cultural association, for example, that create projects with the aim of filling a certain school with a good amount of books. And as a matter of fact, the one big and controversial episode of real censorship, of real book banning in Italy, was linked to one of these projects coming from outside the school. In 2015, in Veneto, the region of Venice, a group of librarians and psychologists, supported by the local government, which was back then a progressive left-wing government, created a list of picture books that all the public schools in the region received as a gift. We're talking about kindergartens and schools for children 0 to 6 years old here. So these picture books were selected according to their ability to promote tolerance and inclusiveness. Some of the titles dealt with the theme of families, different kinds of families. The aim being to promote an open view of what a family can be, like can a newborn have 2 dads or 2 moms, for example, mostly with non-human representations of these non-traditional families, books telling the story of penguins or other species of animals where it is normal for 2 males to lay an egg. Anyway, this exceptional situation where all the schools in a given territory in Italy received many, many books became the object of attention. It became a political issue. It became part of the political campaign during a local election. And the person who won the election and became mayor of Venice, a person coming from the Conservative Party, did what he had promised to do during the campaign. He had all the books removed from the schools, all of them, because some of them portrayed non-traditional families, even if those families were penguins' families, okay? So, I mean, it really was, I would say, an awkward and ultimately ridiculous move, because in the process, some classic books, like Leo Leoni's Little Blue and Little Yellow, for example, got involved and wound up being banned, even if they tell the story of colored paper cuts mingling with each other and giving life to a different color. So this, there was a big uprising. There was a huge debate. It was all over the newspapers, and everybody just wanted to see the titles of that list. Everybody just went to buy those books to see what it was about. So, I mean, this episode shows that when we're talking about democracies, and I stress this, when we're talking about democracies, censorship is execrable, of course, but it is also terribly dull, because it winds up being an incentive to look for the banned books. I teach children's literature to students who will become primary school teachers or are already primary school teachers. And we often talk about this. John was saying the same thing, more or less. If there is one book that you really want your children to read, because it's beautiful, because it is important, because just would love them to read it, the best thing to do is always to say, okay, kids, you can read any of these books, but not this one. This is for older kids. This is too scary for you. this is too violent, this might be disturbing. And you can bet that as soon as the teacher turns around, children will go and look for it. What I mean is, in a democracy where nobody can prevent the publication of a given book, I mean, as long as nobody can prevent the publication of a given book, saying that a book is bad, a published book is bad or wrong or dangerous, just makes the talking about the book more widespread, and that very book more famous, more attractive, and more powerful than it would ever been without the fuss, maybe. What does worry me, though, a lot, because that really makes our bibliodiversity less rich, that really puts our bibliodiversity at risk, is self-censorship. Self-censorship, not someone banning someone else's book, which will circulate anyway, but artists who decide not to write or not to illustrate anything controversial. There are moments in history, even in progressive societies, when the cultural mood, the cultural atmosphere is so ideologically charged that artists might just prefer to simply adapt to the dominant view. What worries me is a world where artists adapt to the dominant view, where artists are no longer there to help us see the world in a different way, with new eyes, with fresh eyes, beyond conventions, beyond habits, beyond common views or shared certainties. Art should always be disturbing more than reassuring. Art should always be mind-opening or thought-provoking. Art should always be there, should always make us see things that are there, but we would never detect without its words, its images, its poetic images. Like, just to make an example, that a child is a wild thing and not a tamed creature. That a child does not belong entirely to us, even though she or he is our own child. I am very, very interested in the representation of children in children's books. And in spite of what Maurice Sendak showed us and told us already in the 60s, and in spite of all the other examples of books and authors, and thinking about Anthony Browne or others, representing children as mysterious, complex, complicated, melancholy, sad, miserable creatures, as persons with an inner turmoil, as persons with a wide range of emotions within themselves. In spite of that, the tendency to portray children as smiling, happy, cheerful, cute little persons still dominates the production of picture books, and still dominates the idea that we as a society have and want to have of what being a child means, and of what a child should see, should find, or not find in a book, represented in a book, like a knife and some blood, for example. And I have one image, double edition of the same picture book by Beatrice Alemagna, and the picture book is called The Wonderful Fluffy Little Squishy. And in the original edition, which was the French edition, in the Italian edition, in the American edition, there is a scene with the little girl getting into a butcher store, and the butcher holds a knife with some drops of blood on the knife. But Thames and Hudson, and that happened a few years ago, published the book and decided to erase the knife and the blood, and which Beatrice Alemagna had painted, of course. So, no blood, blood is not appropriate for children to see. Why not? Children are obsessed with blood. They're so interested in blood. There is a phase in children's lives when they ask you for a Band-Aid, even if they don't have any cut, just to pretend that they do, because they are interested in blood. Why can't they see it in a book? So I was part of a jury for Bologna Children's Book Fair over the last years. We had to select some illustrations among hundreds of illustrations that had arrived in response. So that's the image. She had to redraw the hand, right? So I was saying I was part of a jury, and we had to select illustrations that had arrived in response to a call titled The Child Spectator. Illustrators from all over the world had to portray their own idea of a child spectator, of we don't know what. And you have no idea how many illustrations the jury had to go through with smiling, happy, cheerful children in them. Children with starry eyes, open mouths, surrounded by rainbows, singing birds, dancing fairies. And I'm talking about this year, these illustrators, hundreds, represented children in this way. In which world have they grown? Have they never met a child? Have they never read Maurice Sendak? Or are they portraying what they think most people want to see when they see a child? I was really dispirited by the amount of stereotyped representations of children in this context, and somehow that seems to me more dangerous in cultural terms than banning books with images of children that might be disturbing or wrong for someone, because in that case, that book exists. I want books with non-conventional images of children, of families, of loves, of life, of people to exist. What I fear is a world where books that may be disturbing for someone are not created, are not there, because that's the end of art. Art is not there to please us. Art is there to make us think and feel in a different way than our usual way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly provocative and really makes us think about next. David.
Hey. I'm going to stand because some of you have been seeing the tops of our heads this whole time, and this is what I look like. Hi. All right, so I'll try to keep it brief because I do want to get to the Q&A. But here's the deal. A law passed in the past year preventing mention of any queer identity within schools. Did this happen in Putin's Russia? Did this happen in DeSantis's Florida? The answer is both. And that's really where we are right now. And I'm here in Bologna to sound the alarm about what's happening in America, because the far right is doing it, and whatever country you are from, you better believe that your conservatives are looking at what our conservatives are doing, and they are taking notes. Because what we're seeing right now, as John said, is the politicization of censorship. It used to be censorship was about one person in a community objecting to a book based usually on religious or personal beliefs, and it going through the proper process. That is no longer the case. It is now an organized effort to overthrow public education, to disenfranchise people, and to try to roll back civil rights progress that has been made for Black people, for LGBTQIA+ people, and anybody else who has benefited over the past 50 years. They've dusted off the book censorship playbook, and they're doing it in an organized way that we have never seen before. And if you don't think it can happen in any other country, you're wrong. It can happen anywhere. And so what we need to do is we need to fight. Because here's the thing, the books don't actually matter in this calculation. It's the kids that matter. And these books are being attacked in proxy as a way of scaring children and adults. And if we let it happen, the results will be disastrous. This is an effort by the far right to try to push, in the case of all the LGBTQA plus book legislation and bans, they are trying to push kids back into the closet, and they don't care if they kill themselves there. So we have to fight, and we are fighting. Now, the statistics that Barbara told you are chilling. 2,500 book bans tracked through last August by PEN. An additional 800 tracked in libraries by the American Library Association. This is scary, to say the least, and again, this is just reported. There are probably many more. There are long lists by political legislators of lists of as long as 800 books per list of books that have to be pulled. I was in Texas over the weekend with a librarian who told me that Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury's book protesting the censorship of books, had just been pulled at her library and challenged. That is hugely ironic. We have to find that darkly funny, but it's also not funny at all. So we have to take action. Now, you can look at this as really devastating, these numbers. But you can also look at them as remarkably positive in a way. Because when I hear those numbers, I hear that we have published over 3,000 books that these people are attacking. My favorite statistic of the PEN survey is that their 2,500 books represent 1,800 different authors. Now, I started this game 20 years ago with my book, Boy Meets Boy. I titled it Boy Meets Boy because I wanted kids to know that there was an out and proud book in their library, even if they couldn't take it out. Immediately, I had book events canceled on my way to the school because they finally figured out what the title of my book was. Had protests, you name it. Then, over the course of 20 years, that kind of died down because there were more of us, and more of us, and more of us. And quite frankly, at events like this, where it used to be that an American publisher would go to a foreign publisher with a queer book, and the foreign publisher would say, "We're not quite ready for queer literature yet," that answer stopped happening, and we saw progress. And now what we're seeing is the effort by politicians and the far right to end all of that progress and push us back to where we were, again, in the closet. But 1,800 of us writing these books, 1,800 of us. That means that publishing is actually doing the right thing. We are having bibliodiversity, a term that I love. We are supporting the voices that need to be heard and the voices that scare these people that are trying to shut us up. So we're now at the crossroads. This is the existential question. And I say this to educators and librarians all the time. I say, I bet that you did not become a teacher or become a librarian in order to keep books out of the hands of children. You have to fight. I say this the same to the publishers. None of us went into children's books in order to not publish the voices that need to be heard. We got into this because we know that books matter to kids. We know that they need to see themselves in books and learn about the world through books. And so right at this pivotal moment, we can't back down, we have to double down. And that, again, is why I'm here, to raise the alarm and say, keep fighting. Because the big threat here is the chilling effect. I talk to authors all the time who very nervously say, do you think that this means that I won't be published anymore? Do you think this means that publishers are going to back away from queer books or BIPOC books or books about American historical themes that are now trying to be legislated against? And I swear to them, no. Keep writing. We will keep publishing. The booksellers will keep selling. The librarians will fight to keep the books on the shelves. Every part of that chain has to be there, or else the chain will fall apart. And again, this is as much internationally as it is in America. You have to keep supporting these books, promoting these books, bringing these books into your countries, and making sure that there is the bibliodiversity. Because if there is even a wobble, it will be seen as a chilling effect. And what we need now is to bring in the heat rather than the chill. So we have to really keep supporting them. I'm going to respectfully say that the myth that censorship increases book sales is one we have to actually get rid of. I guarantee you some of those 2,500 books have sold more, but the majority have not. And it doesn't really matter whether your book is selling more if you know that it's not getting to the kids who need it, who are often the poor kids, or the kids in the disadvantaged areas, or the kids who are relying on these teachers and librarians to bring the books into their community because nobody else is going to, including their parents. So again, I cannot stress enough what a crucial moment this is. And again, everyone keeps asking me, what can I do, what can I do? And the answer is very simple: to keep publishing these books, to keep pushing these books, to stand up to these politicians and say, no, what you're doing is wrong. Don't be distracted. I don't give a shit about Roald Dahl's use of fat versus enormous. No kid's life is on the line, whether that word is fat or enormous. We can talk theoretically about it. That is such a distraction right now. There is so much worse censorship that is happening now. There's so many bigger attacks happening now. And that's all we can talk about. We have to stop. We have to focus on the things that are most important to the kids and look at the kids who are being threatened. And we have to support those books and make sure that the media and everybody else is paying attention to that and not what's going on over here. We can have plenty of theoretical conversations about that. It doesn't matter, as opposed to ones where literally books are being attacked because of the identities that they represent. Because that sends the message to the kids that your identity does not matter as everybody else's. And we have to strongly, strongly push back and say, you matter, your books matter, and we support you. So again, we can talk more about how that happens in the Q&A, but that's why I'm here. I flew all the way here just to tell you that, because it is so important. I see these kids every day. I saw these kids in Texas, which again is one of the states where the legislators are trying to ban all of our books. And I talked to teenager after teenager. One kid said, I read your book, Boy Meets Boy, and I came out to my parents 2 days later. And I can't imagine not having that book. And so that is why we fight, that is why we write, that is why we publish. Again, it is an existential question, and we just have to keep doing it. Thanks.
So I know this has been a long session, and I am thankful for all of you who have been able to stay for the whole time. I just want to make sure if you do have any questions that you do get to ask them of the panelists. Do we know how we're handling questions? Are people stepping up, or are there mics? Do we need mics? Anyone have any questions? If you could stand, that would be helpful. If not, I can continue to ask a few questions. Or, yes? Okay, ask it.
So I'm asking this question as a queer Arab American academic and aspiring children's author. And your alarm at the end answered a lot of my question, but I would, in terms of how the far-right discourse, preserving Western civilization, preserving traditional family, preserving gender norms, is all saying, accusing literature now of indoctrinating children. And so I'm curious, and you mentioned teachers and librarians, which points to the battlegrounds of schools and local libraries, but where do publishers step in to form public coalitions to fight back against the censorship? Do they support it monetarily? Do they make donations to the ACLU? Do they actually form more public coalitions in some way that pushes back against this pervasive intersectional discourse from the far right? And so my question is what have you seen publishers do so far? In what ways are they Is it just supporting the writer? Are they supporting teachers? Are they supporting librarians? Are they in dialogue with the ALA, with the Teachers Federation? Where are publishers locating themselves in this fight?
I think what's happening now is there's a huge effort behind the scenes. There's a support, ALA, PEN, NCAC, all the organizations fighting the fight. The publishers are supporting them and behind them. And I think also the publishers are also supporting the authors by, again, the acquisitions have not changed at all. They are very much, I'm not here for my day job, but at Scholastic, when all this was starting, we sent out a letter to all of our authors saying, here's what happens if you are challenged, here are your resources, here you should contact us, and daily somebody contacts us with something that is happening. And so we are there and supporting them. So I think that is all in the plus column. I do agree, though, publicly, the publishers have not done enough, and we were talking before that we need to really amp up very loudly saying, unequivocally, that we are against all of these things and we are not going to change our publishing because of it, and that we, again, are behind all of our authors. Again, I think we do that a lot individually, but I am excited to see collectively an action like that.
A lot of these organizations, including the one that I'm part of, were really caught off guard by how intense and how virulent the book banning wave came at us. But all of these organizations, including NCAC, have been really stepping up their efforts, rethinking their strategies, going after their fundraising in a big way to get themselves the money that they're going to need to enact these fights. And it's a fight. It's a major fight, and it's going to be going on probably for some time now. But the forces of good are becoming fully mobilized. So.
Any other questions before I don't want to shut it down. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm from Singapore, and we are a very conservative country, and censorship comes from government level. I mean, I would say, it's quite similar to China and Russia, the censorship that we have in Singapore. And I just wonder if you have any advice where, the community is so small that we don't have enough people to form a collective. What can we do?
I'm going to start, but again, I encourage others to jump in. I do think that it doesn't mean that being small should not be a reason. I think what we can do is send you all our materials that we have created for you to look at. And I'm not sure governmentally, I don't know what you publish and can publish. But even if you publish Where the Wild Things Are, you are publishing something slightly not the smiling children that we talked about. But I do think if it is escalating to the teen and middle grade area, that you have to look to those of us who are going first and trying to figure it out, because that's what we're doing. And we should be able to help and at least send you materials to try and you just have to make the books as available as you can, because the children will find it. The parents and the government may not let you find it, but the children will find the books they need in the older areas. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
Can I step in? Also, creating communities, informal communities with different looks upon the book. Reading communities of parents, teachers, even presenting the books for the kids, mixing people, and instead you can't counteract what's coming from up with the strengthening the informal discourse as well, informal teaching in schools. I teach as well teachers and future kindergarten teachers, and I take my job very seriously. When I have 30 students, they are hearing from me what, if I have a vision like this, the kind of books I present them become very important. So our jobs are very, I think we are fit for the job because we can act as well like this. We can be in governmental or institutions that are outside, but we are also in the tissue of life. You can do it as well. I don't know if I explained.
Yeah, well, and I'll just add, one of the reasons I was excited about this panel was I do feel that any time internationally we get together, whether it's IBI, whether it is book fairs like this one, we have to have forums where we can swap and talk about what's going on in all of our countries. And I would love to see a more formal organization saying that when we are all together as international publishers, that we specifically talk about this. Because again, what you are up against in Singapore is different than what we're up against in America, but at the same time the thing we're learning in America is we have to get together and strategize, and I think we have to do that on an international level as well as within our different countries.
Anyone else? I am making an executive decision that I would love for you all who are still here to come up and talk to the panelists about specific questions and thoughts you have, continuing the conversation about the important question that you just raised. But I really, really want to thank the panelists, and you can see them right here. I do hope you will stay and come and talk, because it is a conversation that even if some of the panelists are lucky enough to not live in America right now, it is, if your government changes in any way, and I feel it in Italy especially, that's how this panel started, talking to Elena, that it is something you should be aware of, be motivated to get involved, and look at us as an example and almost do better, because we were so caught off guard that we will get there. But if you are facing a similar situation, hopefully you can look at us in 6 months and say, okay, I can pick that up right now, because as David said, it's not like our governments are getting more attuned to what children and parents need. So please come up, talk to us, and thank you very much for staying the course and listening to us today. Thank you.